In the annals of American history, few figures loom as large as Theodore Roosevelt. Emerging as a force of vigor and resolve at the turn of the 20th century, Roosevelt transformed not only the office of the presidency but the very soul of the nation he led. With a robust worldview shaped by both adversity and adventure, he stood as a mediator of peace, an architect of reform, and a relentless advocate for progress, steering the United States from the shadows of provincialism into the spotlight of global leadership. Through the transformative years of his public service, Roosevelt crafted a legacy that endures, a spirit of courage, honor, and duty that continues to resonate in the American consciousness. Roosevelt's journey was characterized by a series of defining chapters, each marked by profound challenges and resounding triumphs. As the great mediator, he broke new ground in the realm of international diplomacy, earning global respect and the Nobel Peace Prize for his adept handling of global crises. His big stick philosophy propelled America onto the world stage, asserting its burgeoning power while championing a new kind of presidential leadership. At home, his drive for reform, regulation, and responsibility reshaped America's economic and social landscape, embedding values that have become integral to the nation's framework. Perhaps nowhere was Roosevelt's vision more evident than in his pursuit of the Panama Canal, a colossal engineering feat that redefined global commerce and symbolized America's capacity for progress. Yet his career was not defined by party loyalty. The emergence of the Bull Moose Party demonstrated his commitment to principles over politics, igniting a third-party revolution that challenged the status quo. Through trials of loss and introspection, Roosevelt displayed remarkable resilience, finding strength in reflection and emerging renewed for further adventure. Chapter 1: The Boy Who Refused to be Weak. The story of Theodore Roosevelt begins not with triumph, but with the persistent shadow of frailty. Born in 1858 into a well-to-do family in New York City, Roosevelt's earliest memories are intertwined with the struggle for breath, the pangs of asthma rendering him more an observer than participant in the bustling world around him. It was in this crucible of physical weakness that the seeds of extraordinary resilience were sown. Rather than yielding to the limitations that nature imposed, young Theodore harbored an unyielding resolve to confront and defy his condition. Roosevelt's home was a place of intellectual richness, filled with books and conversation. His father, Theodore Roosevelt Sr., was a towering figure in his life, devoted, philanthropic, and uncompromising in his belief that with privilege came responsibility. It was his father who first challenged him to make your body, igniting within young Theodore a lifelong campaign to overcome weakness through deliberate effort and self-discipline. With encouragement, Roosevelt undertook a regime of exercise, boxing, and outdoor adventure, not merely as physical rehabilitation, but as acts of willpower. Each increment of strength gained was a testament to the philosophy that fortitude could be cultivated. Roosevelt was a voracious reader, devouring works of natural history, adventure, and politics. His insatiable curiosity was matched by a scientific approach to the world. He maintained collections of flora and fauna and kept meticulous journals. This thirst for knowledge seemed to coexist with a growing awareness that intellectual fortitude needed to be paired with physical robustness. At a time when most children of his class were content with drawing room comfort, Theodore sought the hardship of hikes, hunts, and pushing his limits in any arena available. Asthma attacks, severe and sometimes life-threatening, did not abate. Yet each episode reinforced his determination. Rather than being defined by his affliction, Roosevelt developed an extraordinary capacity for empathy, particularly for those marginalized by circumstance. This empathy would later inform his politics, making him a champion for the square deal, the idea that every citizen deserved a fair shake, regardless of birth or fortune. His family frequently vacationed in the countryside, often in the Adirondacks. Here, Roosevelt encountered the raw forces of nature, which fueled his appreciation for conservation and outdoor adventure. he forged a kinship with the wild, developing skills in marksmanship and horsemanship that would later shape his legendary status as a Rough Rider. Roosevelt's childhood legacy was not merely one of overcoming physical frailty, but also of forging a spirit of tenacity that would underpin every endeavor of his adult life. The boy who refused to be weak grew into a man whose will would become the bedrock of his influence and legacy. In these early years, Roosevelt learned that limitation could be the forge of greatness. His journey from a sickly child to a celebrated figure of unrelenting energy offers a testament to the transformative power of self-determination, a lesson that, for Roosevelt, became the very core of the American ideal he would later champion. Chapter 2: Harvard Days and the Birth of Ambition. At the age of 18, Theodore Roosevelt entered Harvard College, carrying with him the lessons and resolve shaped by his youth. Harvard, in the late 19th century, was not merely an institution of learning. It was a microcosm of American society, brimming with future leaders, thinkers, and reformers. For many, it served as a crucible where ambition was shaped, friendships forged, and the trajectory of life redrawn. For Roosevelt, Harvard would become the arena in which intellect, ambition, and character combined to catapult him toward prominence. The transition from the sheltered Harlem brownstone of his boyhood to the hallowed halls of Harvard was momentous. Initially perceived as an oddity, his voice, mannerisms, and energy marked him as the quintessential outsider. Roosevelt carved out his place with relentless vigor. He flourished academically, immersing himself in courses ranging from biology to political economy. His keen interest in natural history persisted, his scientific pursuits acknowledged by peers and professors alike. Outside the classroom, Roosevelt's engagement was no less fervent. He joined clubs, participated in sports, and wrote prolifically for campus publications. His physical development continued apace, marked by strenuous efforts in rowing and boxing, driven by the desire not just to compete, but to conquer the frailties of his youth. Roosevelt's presence was arresting, his enthusiasm contagious, his convictions strongly held. Roosevelt's Harvard years were formative, not just intellectually, but socially. He encountered the sons of America's elite, the scions of old money and political power. Rather than shrinking from their company, Roosevelt absorbed the nuances of status and influence, determined to make his mark through merit and exertion rather than privilege alone. He formed close, lifelong friendships, most notably with Henry Cabot Lodge, whose future as a senator would intertwine with Roosevelt's political ascent. It was during these years that Roosevelt's sense of ambition crystallized. Exposure to the ferment of ideas and the competition among peers ignited in him a vision of public service grounded in moral purpose. He developed a keen awareness of the American political landscape, viewing reform not as an abstract ideal, but as the necessary work of patriotic citizens. Mr. Roosevelt began to articulate his desire to enter public life, seeing it as the highest calling for one who possessed both capability and conscience. A pivotal moment arrived with the death of Roosevelt's father, a tragedy that forced introspection and maturity. The loss was wrenching, yet Roosevelt transformed his sorrow into motivation, embracing his father's exhortation to get action in life. The grief steeled Roosevelt's resolve to make his life matter, not merely for himself, but for the betterment of his country. These experiences at Harvard and the personal evolution that accompanied them formed the intellectual and emotional foundation upon which Roosevelt would build his future. Harvard was not an escape from the challenges of life. It was an arena in which the best aspects of Theodore Roosevelt's character, resilience, curiosity, ambition, and a sense of duty, were sharpened and intensified. The birth of his ambition was not a private affair, but a commitment to public service that would define his path from that moment onward. Roosevelt left Harvard not only as a scholar, but as a man on a mission, ready to confront the world with the same energy and purpose that had defined his pursuit of health and strength in childhood. Chapter 3: Tragedy and Transformation. The Making of a Fighter. Theodore Roosevelt's young adulthood was punctuated by profound personal loss, a crucible that would shape his character and set the trajectory for his life's work. In February 1884, tragedy struck with a force that would shudder the very foundations of his being. On a single fateful day, Roosevelt lost both his beloved mother and his wife, Alice Lee Roosevelt. Each succumbed to illness within hours of one another in the same house. The depth of Roosevelt's grief defied words. His journals for that day bear only a solitary, black-marked entry: "The light has gone out of my life." Grief, fate's companion, is a private woe, but for Roosevelt, it became a catalyst for transformation. Though shattered, he refused to permit despair to be his master. The loss precipitated a period of profound introspection and re-evaluation. Challenging his resolve and identity, he withdrew from public life, resigning his seat in the New York State Assembly. To escape the anguish, Roosevelt sought the solace of the American West, a place as wild and untamed as the emotions roiling within him. In the Dakota Badlands, Roosevelt found refuge among the cattle ranchers, frontiersmen, and the vast expanse of nature. The act of immersing himself in the elemental world was therapeutic. The hard labor, the biting wind, and the solitude provided a medium for healing. Roosevelt experienced the rigors of ranch life, the branding of cattle, the dangers of stampedes, and the relentless demands of survival. These difficulties, rather than embittering him, forged the resilience and grit required for future battles. This interlude in the West was more than recuperation. It was the making of a fighter, both metaphorical and literal. Roosevelt took to physical labor, braving blizzards and confronting outlaws, developing practical skills and a deep respect for the forces that shaped the frontier. The adversity of the Badlands tempered his sorrow and rekindled his purpose. Here, Roosevelt encountered the raw, unvarnished America, the land of opportunity and peril, where merit rather than privilege prevailed. The transformation was not instantaneous. Roosevelt wrestled with failure and isolation, with memories refusing to be silenced by the howling wind. Yet the Badlands worked their alchemy, forging from tragedy a new, hardened resolve. Roosevelt emerged with a strengthened spirit, possessing an understanding of suffering that would engender empathy toward the downtrodden and emboldened. Resolve against all forms of adversity, Roosevelt's time in the West seeded another dimension to his character, a sense of stewardship for America's natural treasures. Witnessing the fragile beauty and stark dangers of the landscape, he developed an enduring commitment to conservation, later reflected in his presidential policies. The Badlands, both brutal and magnificent, taught Roosevelt that the land itself was as much a part of the nation's spirit as its people. The transformation wrought by tragedy equipped Roosevelt for public service. He returned to New York galvanized, no longer merely the ambitious scholar, but a seasoned fighter, drawn from battle with personal demons and the tribulations of frontier existence. This period of sorrow and recovery would inform his leadership style, a blend of compassion and tenacity, grounded in the knowledge that adversity was neither to be feared nor merely endured, but confronted and mastered. In the forging fire of loss, Roosevelt found not only recovery, but the impetus for greatness. The making of a fighter was complete. It was now time to translate the lessons of private suffering into public good. The spirit forged in the Badlands stood ready to meet the challenges of government, society, and national destiny. Chapter 4: Into the Badlands, Healing Through the Frontier. The healing journey that Theodore Roosevelt undertook in the Dakota Badlands was both physical and spiritual, a renewal that would prove foundational to his later achievements and ideals. The Badlands were emblematic of the American frontier, a place where the rules of society yielded to the demands of nature and the will of the individual. For Roosevelt, who arrived as a man devastated by personal tragedy, this environment offered both the challenge and opportunity for rebirth. Upon arriving in the Dakota Territory, Roosevelt was keenly aware of his outsider status. Easterners were often viewed with suspicion by seasoned ranchers and cowboys. Yet Roosevelt's willingness to embrace hardship, labor, and the authenticity of frontier life soon won him the respect of his peers. He purchased the Maltese Cross Ranch, immersing himself in the daily tasks of cattle management, navigation of the rugged terrain, and engagement with the community of settlers. The work was demanding. There was no respite from the dust, the cold, or the hazards posed by wild animals and lawless men. Roosevelt's days in the Badlands were marked by a routine that contrasted sharply with the structured society of New York. He rose at dawn, participated in cattle drives, repaired fences, and learned the nuances of survival. Though physically taxing, the labor served to discipline his mind and body. Each bruise, each callus became a symbol of the new self he was forging, one built of sturdier stuff than before. The demands of frontier life left no room for self-pity. Pain was mitigated by purpose, sadness by action. The landscape itself played a pivotal role in Roosevelt's transformation. The stark beauty of the Badlands, the eroded buttes, winding rivers, and endless skies provided a canvas for reflection and contemplation. Roosevelt took to horseback expeditions, absorbing the lessons of nature's indifference and resilience. He became an observer of the ecosystem, cataloging species, watching the interplay of predator and prey. This deepened his respect for natural conservation. Nature was not merely to be tamed, but protected and cherished. Socially, Roosevelt navigated the complexities of frontier relationships. He faced outlaws and confrontations that demanded real courage. On one occasion, Roosevelt famously subdued a drunken gunslinger in a local saloon, earning legendary status among the townsfolk. These encounters bolstered his self-assurance, enabling him to translate private confidence into public presence. The healing wrought by the Badlands was not simply the restoration of Roosevelt's spirit, but a reorientation of his worldview. He saw in the rugged landscape an analogy for the American experience, a place where challenges were met with resourcefulness and where character was tested in the crucible of necessity. The lessons learned here would inform both his personal conduct and political philosophy, laying the groundwork for Roosevelt's advocacy of the strenuous life, an ethic that encouraged citizens to embrace toil and hardship as engines of growth and national greatness. The Badlands also awakened Roosevelt's sense of community. The confluence of varied cultures, struggles, and aspirations among the settlers mirrored the broader tapestry of America itself. Roosevelt's friendships with ranchers and cowboys taught him humility, loyalty, and the value of honest work, qualities he would carry into his subsequent public roles. Ultimately, Roosevelt's sojourn in the Badlands marked the closing of one chapter and the beginning of another. The healing was complete, not because sorrow vanished, but because Roosevelt learned to harness grief as motivation for achievement. The frontier did not merely restore his spirit. It furnished him with the resilience, empathy, and pragmatism that would define his service to the nation. As he returned to urban life and political ambition, the lessons of the Badlands became indelible facets of the man now prepared to lead, reform, and inspire. Chapter 5. The Rise of a Reformer. Fighting Corruption in New York. Theodore Roosevelt's return to New York signaled not only the renewal of personal purpose, but also the beginning of a determined campaign against the entrenched forces of corruption and complacency. Energized by his experiences in the West and the conviction that authentic leadership must serve the public good, Roosevelt entered municipal and state politics with a reformer's zeal. Roosevelt began his political career as a member of the New York State Assembly. Here, His reputation for energy and integrity quickly distinguished him from the prevailing culture of patronage and backroom deals. The urban political machine, most notably Tammany Hall, was notorious for its exploitation and manipulation of power. Roosevelt abhorred such machination, seeing in it a betrayal of the principles upon which the Republic was founded. As he rose in prominence, Roosevelt wielded his platform with fearless candor, sponsoring legislation aimed at curbing corruption and promoting transparency. Whether the fight was against fraudulent contracts, unjust taxation, or abuses of labor, Roosevelt marshaled facts, rallied allies, and invoked public moral sense. He understood that reform required not just policy change, but a transformation of civic attitude. Citizens needed to be awakened to the dangers of unchecked power. Roosevelt's activism extended beyond legislation. He became a pragmatic, hands-on reformer. As president of the New York City Board of Police Commissioners, Roosevelt encountered new realms of graft and vice. His reforms were revolutionary. He enforced rules against bribery, established merit in hiring, and initiated regular patrol inspections. These changes met fierce resistance from those who benefited from the status quo, but Roosevelt's tenacity prevailed. His reforms not only improved the efficiency and morality of the police force, but also reasserted the role of government as a servant of the public, not its master. Roosevelt was both a masterful communicator and a relentless advocate. He cultivated the media, recognizing its power to shape public opinion and create momentum for change. His willingness to engage directly with citizens through speeches, writings, and personal appearances earned him widespread respect and popularity. Critics assailed Roosevelt for his idealism and intransigence, accusing him of impracticality. Yet his victories in reform proved that systemic change was possible when political courage was paired with administrative discipline. Roosevelt did not fight solely for abstract principles. He championed policies that protected children, workers, and immigrants, those most vulnerable to exploitation. It was during this period that Roosevelt's vision of citizenship evolved most profoundly. He called upon Americans to demand more from their leader and to participate actively in the work of democracy. His reforms were not acts of moral self-indulgence, but efforts to restore public faith in governance. Roosevelt's tenure in New York politics built the foundation for his national ambitions. By confronting corruption and enacting lasting change, he demonstrated that government could be a force for good, guided by values rather than interests. This chapter in his life stands as evidence that reform is the lifeblood of progress, an essential element in the perpetual forging of America's spirit. Chapter 6. The Rough Rider. Courage on the battlefield. Theodore Roosevelt's journey from reformer to war hero unfolded against the backdrop of international conflict, the Spanish-American War. In 1898, the war's onset galvanized Roosevelt's sense of duty and adventure. Resigning as Assistant Secretary of the Navy, Roosevelt sought direct engagement, organizing the 1st United States Volunteer Cavalry, famously known as the Rough Riders. Recruitment drew a diverse assemblage: cowboys, miners, Native Americans, and Ivy League athletes. The composition of the Rough Riders mirrored Roosevelt's belief in the unity and strength of American diversity. With Roosevelt as their second-in-command, the unit trained in San Antonio, testing their endurance and camaraderie. Roosevelt's leadership style was hands-on. He drilled with his men, shared in their discomforts, and fostered unyielding esprit de corps. The campaign in Cuba was fraught with logistical challenges, tropical diseases, and incessant danger. Roosevelt's courage was manifest not only in his willingness to lead from the front, but also in his readiness to endure the same perils as his men. The most iconic moment arrived at the Battle of San Juan Hill, where Roosevelt famously charged on horseback, his Rough Riders surging behind him. Historians would debate the tactical impact, but for the American public, The image of Roosevelt rallying his men in the face of enemy fire became emblematic of valor. Roosevelt's battlefield leadership was distinguished by both tactical acumen and personal bravery. In the midst of chaos, he inspired cohesion, demonstrating that courage is contagious, an essential element in both military and civic life. His conduct earned the admiration of subordinates and commanders alike, and upon his return, Roosevelt's fame soared as a national hero. Yet for Roosevelt, heroism was not a matter of mere decoration or public acclaim. He viewed warfare as a crucible of character, bestowing upon participants both the wisdom of sacrifice and the solemn duty to pursue peace. The experience deepened Roosevelt's understanding of national service and the complex responsibilities of military and political power. Roosevelt's leadership of the Rough Riders also influenced his political philosophy. He argued that national greatness required not just economic strength or territorial acquisition, but the cultivation of civic virtue. The lessons learned in battle, discipline, unity, adaptability, became metaphors for his approach to governance. While the public celebrated Roosevelt as a warrior, he remained sober about the costs of war. The loss of comrades and the horrors witnessed in combat reinforced his belief in the importance of peace, diplomacy, and the ethical use of force. Roosevelt's war record became a cornerstone of his national reputation, propelling him toward positions of increasing influence. The legacy of Roosevelt as a Rough Rider is not simply one of military accomplishment, but of the reaffirmation of the values that constitute the American spirit: courage, adaptability, and leadership in the face of adversity. In Cuba, Roosevelt proved not merely his own mettle, but inspired a nation to believe anew in the transformative power of shared sacrifice. Chapter 7. From War Hero to Politician: The Road to the White House. The early chronicles of Theodore Roosevelt's ascendancy form a stirring tableau of transformation, one that saw a frail, asthmatic boy of privilege become a symbol of American vigor and ultimately a political icon whose journey to the White House was neither inevitable nor ordinary. Born in 1858 into one of New York City's wealthy families, Roosevelt's formative years were shaped by both the comforts of affluence and the challenges of ill health. Yet even as a child, he possessed an insatiable curiosity and a stubborn fortitude that enabled him to defy physical restrictions through sheer willpower. Roosevelt's intellectual curiosity emerged early, fostered by devoted parents who encouraged his voracious reading and disciplined inquiry. His father, Theodore Roosevelt Sr., imparted ideals of service and moral obligation, laying the foundation for the public-minded ethos that would later define Roosevelt's career. Confronted with respiratory illness, young Theodore adopted a rigorous program of exercise, transforming weakness into strength and instilling a lifelong belief in the strenuous life, an idea he preached, lived and led. Harvard University marked the next chapter, blending academic achievement with leadership in campus societies. Enthralled by history and natural sciences, Roosevelt cultivated a breadth of perspective that would serve him as he moved into the political arena. The impact of a personal tragedy, his wife Alice's death, closely followed by his mother's passing on the same day, plunged him into grief, leading him to seek solace in the rugged Dakota Badlands, where he honed the resilience and hands-on wisdom that marked his later public persona. Roosevelt's entry into politics began in the New York State Assembly, where his reformist zeal encountered the realities of Gilded Age corruption. Unafraid to clash with powerful interests, Roosevelt's reputation for integrity and energetic advocacy grew. Whether fighting for civil service reform, battling for labor's rights, or exposing municipal graft, he quickly established himself as an adversary to the status quo. Rising through various posts, member of the Civil Service Commission, New York Police Commissioner, and eventually Assistant Secretary of the Navy, Roosevelt displayed an unmistakable blend of principle and pragmatism. It was his tenure at the Navy that catalyzed the most dramatic turn, the outbreak of the Spanish-American War in 1898. Resigning his commission, Roosevelt organized and led the legendary Rough Riders, a volunteer cavalry regiment, into the battlefields of Cuba. The charge up San Juan Hill, emblazoned by courage and leadership, catapulted him into the national spotlight as a war hero and embodiment of American valor. With the war's end came new opportunities. Voters, inspired by his dynamism, elected Roosevelt governor of New York, where he accelerated reforms that limited corporate influence, expanded public health measures, and championed fair labor standards. His assertive approach garnered both fierce opposition and widespread admiration, marking him as a rising force in national politics. In 1900, the Republican Party, seeking to neutralize his reformist zeal, nominated Roosevelt as vice president under President William McKinley. The plan was simple: confine his energy to an office traditionally bereft of power. Fate, however, had a different design. The assassination of McKinley in September 1901 elevated Roosevelt to the presidency at the age of 42, the youngest man ever to assume the office. This journey, from war hero to political reformer and, finally, to accidental president, was not merely the result of ambition or fortune. It was a saga rooted in personal discipline, moral conviction, and unwavering faith in the transformational potential of public service. Roosevelt's path to the White House exemplified the belief that leadership is both earned and thrust upon those ready to shoulder responsibility. And with his ascent, America stood on the brink of profound change. As Roosevelt took the oath, it was not simply a new president who stood before the nation, but the embodiment of a new spirit, a spirit forged in adversity, sharpened in battle, and tempered by the demands of conscience and citizenship. This chapter in Roosevelt's life not only marks the genesis of his presidency, but also inaugurates a period where America itself would be remade in the indomitable image of its leader. Chapter 8: The Accidental President, Leadership After McKinley. Theodore Roosevelt's presidency began not with election fanfare, but with a nation in mourning and uncertainty. On September 14, 1901, the news of President William McKinley's death reverberated across the country. Roosevelt, scarcely 9 months into his tenure as vice president, was summoned to assume a role he had neither sought nor prepared for explicitly. Yet within hours of McKinley's passing, it became clear that Roosevelt was not only ready, but uniquely equipped to seize the mantle of leadership. Upon taking the presidential oath, Roosevelt was confronted by a divided political landscape, economic transformation, and lingering wounds from the Spanish-American War. Partisans in the Republican Party, especially the conservative old guard, led by Senator Mark Hanna, viewed the cowboy president with suspicion. They feared, with good reason, that Roosevelt's reformist inclinations would disrupt the comfortable alliance between political and business interests that had shaped American governance. The young president was determined, however, to defy expectations. He pledged continuity with McKinley's administration, reassuring financial markets and promising national stability. But Roosevelt interpreted his mandate broadly, seeing the presidency not as a passive office, but as a bully pulpit, a platform from which to champion issues of justice, equality, and progress. Roosevelt's leadership style deviated sharply from that of his predecessors. He was the first modern president, embracing the media, courting public opinion, and deploying the full resources of the executive branch to solve national problems. Where once cabinet sessions had been routine affairs, Roosevelt transformed them into dynamic forums for debate and innovation. He personally engaged with leaders of labor and capital, environmentalists and industrialists, foreign diplomats and domestic reformers, seeking pragmatic solutions that balanced competing interests. His early months in office were marked by decisive actions. Roosevelt claimed authority to use antitrust laws against oppressive monopolies, launched efforts to regulate railroads, and insisted that government must serve as an arbiter in labor disputes, most notably during the 1902 coal strike, when he summoned both mine owners and workers to the White House. This intervention broke decades of executive passivity and signaled that the federal government would protect both corporate profits and the welfare of ordinary Americans. The public responded enthusiastically. Roosevelt's energy, optimism, and willingness to confront entrenched power won him admiration and, gradually, political allies among both progressives and moderates. The White House became a locus of reform, attracting thinkers, writers, and activists who saw in Roosevelt a partner for ambitious change. On foreign affairs, Roosevelt maintained stability in the Caribbean and Pacific, continued the expansion of the Navy started under McKinley, and cultivated relationships with European powers through both firmness and diplomacy, setting the stage for America's eventual emergence as a global leader. Yet Roosevelt remained acutely aware of the limits of executive power. Despite his activism, he respected the constraints imposed by law and tradition, striving to build consensus where possible and acting unilaterally only when circumstances demanded. His careful stewardship preserved the presidency's legitimacy, even as he expanded its reach. In these transformative years, Roosevelt redefined what it meant to lead a modern democracy. His willingness to act on principle, his ability to inspire trust, and his skill at navigating political complexity marked his tenure as a watershed era in American governance. By the time his first full term began, Roosevelt had already laid the foundation for the reforms and initiatives that would shape American society for decades. Leadership after McKinley, in Roosevelt's hands, was neither accidental nor reactive. It was purposeful, creative, and innovative. The accidental president became, in effect, the architect of a renewed American spirit, one rooted in fairness, dynamism, and unyielding hope. Chapter 9. The Square Deal. Justice for the Common Man. At the core of Theodore Roosevelt's domestic policy lay the Square Deal, a comprehensive vision that sought to balance the interests of business, labor, and the public, ensuring that prosperity did not come at the expense of justice. First articulated during the coal strike of 1902, the Square Deal became the defining framework of Roosevelt's presidency and a touchstone for American progressivism. The term itself reflected Roosevelt's plain-spoken philosophy. Every citizen should receive a square deal, meaning fairness, equal opportunity, and protection under the law. His administration grappled with the excesses of the Gilded Age: unregulated monopolies, unsafe working conditions, political corruption, and social inequality. Roosevelt recognized that industrial expansion had brought unprecedented wealth and power, but also exposed millions to exploitation and hardship. Central to the Square Deal was the conviction that government must act as an honest broker. This belief was tested early during the anthracite coal strike of 1902, when 140,000 miners in Pennsylvania walked out, demanding higher wages and shorter hours. Previous presidents had reflexively sided with owners, but Roosevelt intervened by inviting both parties to the White House. When negotiations stalled, he threatened to seize the mines, a radical step for the era. The compromise reached not only provided modest wage increases for the miners, but also signaled a new responsibility for the federal government in labor relations. Roosevelt's Square Deal encompassed three main areas: control of corporations, consumer protection, and conservation of natural resources. He wielded the Sherman Antitrust Act aggressively, challenging the might of trusts such as Northern Securities. Roosevelt's actions led to the dissolution of several monopolies, establishing the principle that government could and should restrain corporate power when it threatened the public interest. Consumer protection took center stage with the passage of landmark legislation, most notably the Pure Food and Drug Act and the Meat Inspection Act of 1906, spurred by public outrage after Upton Sinclair's The Jungle exposed unsanitary conditions in the nation's meatpacking industry. Roosevelt pressed Congress for laws that mandated truthful labeling, safe ingredients, and federal inspection, a revolution in food safety and public health. The Square Deal also championed the rights of workers. Roosevelt expanded protections against unsafe working environments, advocated for the regulation of child labor, and supported a fairer distribution of wealth, a message that resonated powerfully in cities and rural communities alike. Roosevelt's rhetoric matched his deeds. He toured the country, speaking directly to the American people, explaining the aims and successes of his policies. He used newspapers and magazines to shape public opinion, mastering the art of the bully pulpit to rally support for reform. Yet the Square Deal was more than a set of policies. It was a moral assertion that democracy must serve the many, not the few. Roosevelt believed that without active government engagement, powerful interests would inevitably distort markets, degrade workers, and corrupt politics. His insistence on fairness propelled a wave of activism that inspired future generations of reformers. By the end of his presidency, the Square Deal had left an indelible mark on the fabric of American society. It broadened the notion of citizenship, expanded the social contract, and lifted the aspirations of millions. Roosevelt's legacy in this domain endures as a benchmark of American justice, a testament to what principled leadership can achieve when it places the common good above narrow advantage. In Chapter 10, Breaking the Trusts, Champion of the People, Theodore Roosevelt's crusade against the powerful trusts is among the most dramatic and consequential episodes of his presidency. The early 20th century economic landscape was dominated by vast corporations, Standard Oil, U.S. Steel, and others, whose monopolistic practices stifled competition, manipulated prices, and wielded influence over American politics with impunity. Roosevelt, resolute in his commitment to fairness, became the nation's first true trust buster, determined to assert public interest over private aggrandizement. Roosevelt was not inherently anti-business. He admired entrepreneurship and innovation, recognizing their vital role in economic growth. However, he drew a firm distinction between good trusts, those that operated fairly and promoted efficiency, and bad trusts, which resorted to predatory tactics, coercion, and corruption. For Roosevelt, unchecked monopoly power dangerously undermined the principles of free markets and democratic governance. The turning point came with the Northern Securities case. This railroad conglomerate, controlled by financiers J.P. Morgan, James J. Hill, and E.H. Harriman, represented the epitome of bad trusts. In 1902, Roosevelt instructed the Justice Department to invoke the Sherman Antitrust Act, a law long neglected, and initiated a suit to dissolve the corporation. The Supreme Court, in a landmark decision, ruled in Roosevelt's favor, affirming the president's authority to curb corporate abuses. This victory was no isolated event. Roosevelt ordered more than 40 antitrust suits during his tenure, targeting monopolies across sectors from beef packing to oil. Each battle reinforced the principle that economic power must be subject to democratic checks. The president's boldness sent shockwaves through the business community, forcing corporations to reconsider mergers, pricing strategies, and relationships with state regulators. Roosevelt's campaign faced formidable opposition. Powerful businessmen cried socialism, political adversaries warned of economic chaos, and even some allies urged caution. Yet Roosevelt, undeterred, insisted that the government's role was not to destroy industry, but to safeguard competition and protect the public from abuse. His administration introduced new mechanisms, such as the Bureau of Corporations, to monitor corporate activity and enforce fair practices. The public, long disillusioned by stories of labor exploitation and market manipulation, rallied behind Roosevelt. His speeches denounced greed and corruption, calling on citizens to demand accountability and integrity. The trust-busting campaign resonated deeply, particularly among workers, farmers, and small entrepreneurs who had suffered under monopolistic regimes. Significantly, Roosevelt's approach was both legal and cultural. He educated Americans about economic fairness, demonstrating that markets flourish only when opportunity is broadly shared. He recognized the limits of legislation alone. Without public support and vigilant enforcement, reforms would falter. Roosevelt worked tirelessly to build consensus for his policies, frequently engaging with Congress, the press, and the electorate. The legacy of Roosevelt's war against the trusts is profound. By asserting the primacy of public interest, he redefined the relationship between government and business. His activism paved the way for future reforms, culminating in subsequent antitrust laws, regulatory agencies, and the expansion of the federal government's oversight role. More than a struggle over corporations, Roosevelt's confrontation with the trusts embodied a larger philosophical contest. Was America to be ruled by concentrated wealth or by principles of justice and equality? Roosevelt's answer, articulated through both words and deeds, remains at the heart of the American ethos, a champion of the people whose legacy continues to inform debates over power, responsibility, and the common good. Chapter 11: Conserving the Wild, the Birth of Environmental Policy. Theodore Roosevelt's presidency heralded the birth of environmental policy in the United States, a testament to his deep reverence for nature and his belief in stewardship as both a moral and political imperative. Amidst rapid industrialization, urban expansion, and the exploitation of natural resources, Roosevelt recognized with urgency the need to protect America's wilderness for future generations. Roosevelt's affinity for the outdoors was not simply recreational. From boyhood expeditions in the forests of New York to his rugged years in the Dakota Badlands, he cultivated an intimate understanding of the land and its ecological systems. He saw the majestic beauty of America's mountains, forests, and rivers, yet also observed their vulnerability to unchecked logging, hunting, and mining. As president, Roosevelt became the most conservation-minded leader in American history. He transformed the executive role, establishing the government as guardian of the environment. In partnership with visionaries such as Gifford Pinchot and John Muir, Roosevelt launched an ambitious campaign to set aside millions of acres as public land, preserve wildlife, and promote sustainable resource management. During his tenure, Roosevelt created 5 national parks, 18 national monuments, and 51 bird reserves. He signed into law the Antiquities Act of 1906, empowering presidents to designate national monuments to protect natural, historical, and scientific assets. Landmark sites such as the Grand Canyon and Muir Woods were preserved by Roosevelt's deft use of executive authority. Under his leadership, the Forest Service was established, charged with managing and conserving public woodlands. Roosevelt believed that resources must serve the broad public interest, not be depleted for private gain. His administration introduced scientific principles to forestry management, emphasizing renewal, sustainability, and the harmonious coexistence of economics and ecology. Roosevelt's conservation ethos extended to wildlife protection, water management, and agricultural reform. He supported legislation regulating hunting, sought to restore depleted fisheries, and advocated for the development of irrigation systems in the arid West, projects that balanced human needs with environmental integrity. Roosevelt was a gifted communicator, using speeches and writings to awaken popular consciousness. He described conservation as a patriotic duty, a matter of national survival and moral obligation. His message resonated in an era of rapid change, forging a new dialogue between Americans and their land. Yet Roosevelt's vision was not without controversy. Powerful interests opposed restrictions on resource extraction, and some critics worried that federal management would stifle local autonomy. Roosevelt responded by forging alliances with farmers, sportsmen, and civic organizations, demonstrating that stewardship need not conflict with prosperity. The birth of environmental policy under Roosevelt stands as one of his most enduring legacies. He laid the groundwork for modern conservation, inspiring future leaders to pursue preservation, restoration, and sustainable development. Through his initiatives, America began to see its natural heritage not as a limitless bounty, but as a sacred trust, one that demands respect, devotion, and vigilance. Roosevelt's achievements in this domain remind us that leadership requires vision and courage. He anticipated the ethical and pragmatic dilemmas of resource use, offering a roadmap for balancing individual ambition with the common good. The vast parks, forests, and wildlife protected under his guidance remain living monuments to his conviction, a celebration of nature and an assertion of the enduring spirit that binds the American people to the land they call home. Chapter 12. The Great Mediator, Diplomacy and the Nobel Peace Prize. The 20th century dawned with international tensions simmering and empires vying for dominance. In this volatile landscape, Theodore Roosevelt emerged as an unlikely peacemaker, a statesman whose vision transcended the boundaries of power politics to embrace the ideals of diplomacy, conciliation, and global stewardship. Perhaps nothing illustrates Roosevelt's diplomatic legacy more vividly than his role in resolving the Russo-Japanese War of 1904-1905, an achievement that culminated in his receipt of the Nobel Peace Prize. Roosevelt's approach to diplomacy was rooted in a philosophy that balanced firmness with fairness. Although celebrated for his big stick policy, he also understood the psychic need for reassurance and negotiation. As president, Roosevelt recognized that American prosperity and security were entwined with global stability. The war between Russia and Japan threatened to destabilize the Pacific and imperil American interests in Asia. With both nations locked in a brutal conflict, Roosevelt sensed an opportunity to wield America's rising influence as a force for peace. His mediation began with discreet correspondence. Roosevelt reached out to both Russian and Japanese officials, offering his services as a neutral intermediary and facilitating communication that had all but ceased. He orchestrated talks with deliberate neutrality, hosting negotiations in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Throughout the discussions, Roosevelt maintained a careful balance, tempering the demands of both sides while emphasizing the broader interests at stake: a stable Pacific, preserved trade routes, and the avoidance of further bloodshed. Roosevelt's success rested on his ability to understand the motivations and limitations of both parties. He recognized Russia's need for dignity and defeat, and Japan's growing ambitions. Through patient dialogue, he encouraged concessions and maintained momentum, often working behind the scenes to resolve contentious issues before they escalated. His keen psychological insight allowed him to anticipate objections and propose solutions that enabled agreement. The Treaty of Portsmouth, signed in September 1905, ended hostilities and set new diplomatic precedents. Roosevelt became the first American to win the Nobel Peace Prize, an honor that reflected both his pragmatic skills and his aspirational vision for world peace. The award was not without controversy. Critics claimed that some Allied concerns were left unaddressed and that Roosevelt's diplomatic overtures masked underlying strategic interests. Nevertheless, the achievement underscored his capacity for leadership in times of crisis. Beyond the negotiations themselves, Roosevelt's philosophy of speaking softly laid the foundation for modern American diplomacy. He understood that national interests could be pursued without aggression, provided leaders were equipped with the resolve to mediate and the tactical wisdom to negotiate. His stewardship marked a transition in the global role of the United States. From isolationist spectator to active participant in world affairs, Roosevelt's commitment to diplomacy extended throughout his presidency. He advocated for a balance of power in the Western Hemisphere, brokered agreements to limit the arms race, and pressed for international cooperation on issues ranging from trade to environmental conservation. His legacy as a mediator is perhaps most enduring in the spirit he infused into America's foreign policy. The conviction that peace is neither passive nor weak, but the outcome of persistent effort, acute judgment, and unwavering conviction. Thus, the chapter on Roosevelt as the great mediator captures the transformative character of his presidency. It reveals a man capable of vision beyond borders, wielding both authority and empathy in pursuit of a higher good. In leading America into a new era of diplomacy, Roosevelt built a foundation of trust and respect that continues to influence international relations to this day. Chapter 13. The Big Stick. America's rise on the world stage. As the world entered a new era of industrialization and expansion, America stood poised to redefine its place among nations. Theodore Roosevelt, with his rugged determination and strategic acumen, was the leader who would propel the country from the periphery of global affairs to its center. The doctrine that encapsulated his approach was famously summarized as "speak softly and carry a big stick," a philosophy that blended restraint with readiness, diplomacy with deterrence, and aspiration with action. The big stick policy was not merely a slogan, it was a blueprint for American assertiveness. Roosevelt believed that while negotiation and peace were preferable, a nation must be prepared to back its words with credible power. Under his administration, this principle shaped both foreign and domestic affairs, signaling that the United States would no longer shrink from international responsibilities or threats. Central to Roosevelt's vision was the growth of American naval power. Early in his presidency, he recognized that global influence required capability at sea. The Great White Fleet, a squadron of gleaming modern battleships, became a symbol of American might and a tool of diplomacy. Roosevelt ordered the fleet on a worldwide tour, visiting ports on 6 continents. The spectacle was not intended as provocation, but as a demonstration of readiness. The message was clear. America was peaceful, yet formidable. The impact of this strategy was immediate. Nations previously skeptical of American intentions now saw the U.S. as a participant instead of a bystander. The Navy's expansion enabled the protection of American interests abroad, particularly in Latin America and the Pacific, regions vital to trade and security. Roosevelt's interventions in regional affairs often invoked the Monroe Doctrine and its corollary, the assertion that the U.S. had a right to intervene to preserve stability and autonomy in the hemisphere. Beyond military might, Roosevelt's leadership was characterized by decisive action during crises. When Germany sought to collect debts from Venezuela through military means, Roosevelt brokered international agreements to resolve disputes peacefully. He understood that intervention did not necessarily mean occupation, but rather the preservation of order where chaos threatened American interests. Domestically, the Big Stick Doctrine informed his approach to industrial reform. Roosevelt battled powerful trusts and monopolies, asserting federal authority to regulate abuses. He favored dialogue, but was unafraid to wield the stick of legal action when necessary. Through a series of antitrust cases, he reined in corporate excess and asserted that the public good must come before private gain. Roosevelt's vision for America was expansive, encompassing the right and responsibility to lead on the world stage. He articulated a form of national interest that included moral consideration, the belief that America should be a force for progress as well as prosperity. The Big Stick policy, while sometimes criticized for its assertiveness, was fundamentally rooted in a desire for stability and the prevention of war. The legacy of Roosevelt's global leadership endures in the structure of modern American foreign policy. His insistence on preparedness and principled strength redefined the presidency and charted a course for the nation as a superpower. In wielding the big stick, Roosevelt taught that power must be tempered by wisdom and influenced by integrity. America's rise on the world stage under Roosevelt was neither accidental nor inevitable. It was the product of deliberate strategy, visionary leadership, and unwavering resolve. By carrying the big stick, Roosevelt ushered in an era of engagement, opened markets, secured alliances, and charted the trajectory of American influence for generations to come. Chapter 14: Reform, Regulation, and Responsibility. If Theodore Roosevelt's foreign policy was characterized by assertive strength, his domestic agenda radiated the energy of reform and responsibility. At the dawn of the progressive era, America was beset by the challenges of industrialization, economic inequality, corporate monopolies, unsafe working conditions, and environmental degradation. Roosevelt's presidency became the crucible in which the nation's conscience and its commitment to equity were forged. Roosevelt's approach to reform was dynamic and multifaceted. He believed in the power of government to promote the welfare of its citizens, protect resources, and maintain fair play within a capitalist system. Understanding the limits and abuses of unchecked corporate power, Roosevelt acted as a champion of the public interest against the excesses of the Gilded Age. Antitrust action was among his signature achievements. Roosevelt's administration filed more lawsuits against monopolies than any previous president. His famous confrontation with the Northern Securities Company demonstrated a new willingness to challenge industrial titans. Roosevelt saw regulation not as a restraint on growth, but as a guarantee of fair competition. The dissolution of trusts sent a clear signal that the federal government would no longer tolerate practices that stifled innovation or exploited workers and consumers. Beyond the realm of commerce, Roosevelt advanced the cause of social justice. He pressed for improved working conditions, advocating for an 8-hour day, workplace safety, and the abolition of child labor. His support for labor unions was nuanced. He saw them as necessary counterweights to corporate power, but insisted on moderation and negotiation. The intervention in the 1902 coal strike, which secured a favorable settlement for workers, was emblematic of his balanced approach. Roosevelt also recognized the imperative of environmental stewardship. Alarmed by the rapid depletion of American forests and wildlife, he established numerous national parks, forests, and wildlife refuges. His conservation policies laid the groundwork for future environmental regulation, making him the conservation president. He spoke passionately of the need to preserve the nation's natural beauty for future generations, linking civic responsibility to the health of the land itself. Regulation, for Roosevelt, was not an end, but a means, a tool for shaping a society that balanced liberty with accountability. He expanded the reach of the Interstate Commerce Commission, strengthened the Food and Drug Administration through the Pure Food and Drug Act, and pressed for consumer protections. Each initiative reflected his belief that citizenship entailed both rights and responsibilities. Despite formidable opposition from industrialists and political adversaries, Roosevelt's commitment to reform never wavered. He used the bully pulpit of the presidency to mobilize public opinion, inspiring citizens to see themselves as stakeholders in national progress. His speeches, rich with moral fervor, emphasized the ideals of justice and equality. The era of reform under Roosevelt charted a new direction for American democracy. Regulation checked the excesses of capitalism, responsibility animated the public conscience, and social justice became a cornerstone of government policy. Roosevelt understood that progress required not only innovation, but restraint, a balance between ambition and humility. His legacy as a reformer is evident in the lasting structures of federal oversight, labor protection, and environmental stewardship. Roosevelt's vision for America was not simply of a great nation, but of a good one, a society dignified by accountability and compassion. In the furnace of reform, Roosevelt forged a new pact between citizen and government, corporate power and public need, shaping the fabric of the nation for generations yet to come. Chapter 15. The Panama Canal, a Vision of Progress. Few undertakings in American history can match the ambition and impact of the construction of the Panama Canal. For Theodore Roosevelt, it was much more than an engineering project. It represented America's capacity to reshape the world, its willingness to confront daunting obstacles, and its commitment to progress as both a principle and a promise. The need for a canal linking the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans was recognized long before Roosevelt entered office. Commercial interests, military strategists, and explorers alike envisioned a passage that would revolutionize global trade, enable rapid military deployment, and extend the reach of American power. For decades, attempts to build the canal languished in the mire of political, financial, and technical challenges. French efforts had failed spectacularly, succumbing to disease and logistical confusion. Roosevelt was undaunted. He saw the canal not only as a strategic asset, but as a symbol of national will. Upon becoming president, Roosevelt made the canal a priority, navigating complex political waters to secure the rights necessary for construction. Negotiations with Colombia proved fruitless, leading Roosevelt to support Panamanian independence, a move that, while controversial, enabled the signing of the Bunau-Varilla Treaty and gave America the rights to begin work. The construction itself was a marvel of organization and innovation. Roosevelt took a hands-on interest, traveling to Panama in 1906 to inspect progress, becoming the first sitting president to leave the continental United States. Under his direction, the project was reorganized, prioritizing sanitation, logistics, and workforce management. The appointment of engineers such as John Frank Stevens and later George Washington Goethals ensured that the work would proceed with efficiency and expertise. Disease was the greatest enemy. Malaria and yellow fever had decimated earlier efforts, but Roosevelt's administration implemented rigorous public health campaigns, eradication programs, and infrastructure improvements. Hospitals, housing, and clean water transformed the working environment, reducing casualties and increasing productivity. Technologically, the canal presented unprecedented challenges. The creation of massive locks, the excavation of the Culebra Cut, and the construction of enormous dams tested the limits of contemporary engineering. Roosevelt's determination to make the dirt fly rallied workers and administrators alike. The canal, completed in 1914, stood as a testament to imagination and resolve. The repercussions of the canal's completion were profound. Internationally, it solidified America's standing as a world power capable of shaping global commerce and military strategy. Ships could now transit between oceans with unprecedented speed, altering patterns of trade and diplomacy. The Canal Zone became a hub of diverse cultures, commerce, and strategic significance, yet the project was not without controversy. Roosevelt's tactics in securing the canal rights, including the manipulation of Panamanian independence, were criticized as overreach. Debates about imperialism, sovereignty, and moral responsibility dogged his administration. Roosevelt, however, saw the canal as both a human and a national victory, a success born of pragmatism, vision, and American ingenuity. For Roosevelt, the canal embodied the principle of progress, an audacious affirmation of the nation's willingness to dream and to do. Its completion was not only a triumph of engineering, but a legacy of leadership, one that expanded the reach of American ideals and opened new horizons for future generations. The Panama Canal endures as an emblem of Roosevelt's presidency, a bridge not only between oceans, but between aspirations and achievements. It is a monument to what is possible when vision is united with will, when leadership is animated by both ambition and responsibility. In the story of the canal, Roosevelt's spirit of progress finds its fullest expression. Chapter 16. The Bull Moose, a third-party revolution. The contours of American politics have often been shaped by the two-party system, yet there are moments when the force of conviction and the dynamism of individual leadership transcend partisan boundaries. For Theodore Roosevelt, the year 1912 marked such a moment, a bold venture that redefined political discourse, challenged entrenched interests, and gave birth to a movement known as the Bull Moose Party. The genesis of the Bull Moose Party lay in Roosevelt's disillusionment with the Republican establishment. After his presidency, Roosevelt saw the party drifting away from progressive ideals, succumbing to corporate influence and complacency. Frustrated by the policies of his successor, William Howard Taft, Roosevelt sought to reclaim the reformist spirit that had animated his administration. When denied the Republican nomination, he broke with tradition and launched an independent bid for the presidency. Roosevelt's campaign was revolutionary not merely in its tactics, but in its principles. The progressive Bull Moose Party embodied a platform of social justice, direct democracy, and regulatory reform. Roosevelt advocated for women's suffrage, labor rights, social insurance, and government accountability, a visionary agenda that presaged many later reforms. His rhetoric was electrifying. He proclaimed himself fit as a bull moose, signaling his determination and vigor. The party mobilized a wide coalition, working-class citizens, reformers, intellectuals, and marginalized communities. Roosevelt's supporters hailed him as the voice of conscience in a political landscape dominated by corporate interests. His campaign rallies were marked by fervor and hope, challenging voters to imagine a more just and participatory democracy. The election of 1912 was among the most consequential in American history. Roosevelt's candidacy split the Republican vote, effectively handing victory to Democrat Woodrow Wilson, but propelling the progressive agenda to center stage. Roosevelt himself survived an assassination attempt during the campaign, delivering a speech with the bullet still lodged in his chest, embodying the indomitable spirit of the bull moose. Although the Progressive Party did not win the presidency, its impact was profound. Roosevelt's campaign shifted public debate, forced the mainstream parties to adopt reformist planks, and expanded the reach of democracy. The Bull Moose movement introduced ideas that would later be adopted at the state and federal levels, including campaign finance reform, environmental protection, and expanded civil rights. Roosevelt's third-party revolution tested the boundaries of American politics. With courage and conviction, he defied the constraints of party loyalty, insisting that principles must come before expediency. In so doing, he opened the door for future movements and demonstrated the potency of vision in shaping national identity. The Bull Moose chapter of Roosevelt's career stands as a testament to the power of leadership when married to values. It was an experiment in democracy, a challenge to cynicism, and a call to action for citizens seeking progress. The legacy of the Bull Moose Party endures not in electoral victories, but in the ideals it championed and the courage it inspired. Chapter 17. Trials of Age, Loss, Reflection, and Resilience. The life of Theodore Roosevelt was punctuated not only by triumphs, but by profound adversities. As age and circumstance imposed new challenges, Roosevelt's story became one of resilience, his ability to absorb loss, reflect on its meaning, and return strengthened to the pursuits he cherished. Tragedy first touched Roosevelt early in life. The loss of his first wife and mother on the same day seared his spirit, compelling him to seek solace in the wilderness of the Badlands. Later, as age advanced, Roosevelt confronted new forms of loss, political defeats, physical infirmity, and the shattering grief of war. His 4 sons all served bravely in World War I. The death of Quentin, his youngest, in aerial combat, grieved Roosevelt foremost among all his trials. The accumulation of these losses prompted periods of deep reflection. Roosevelt, always introspective, turned to writing, correspondence, and conversation to make sense of sorrow. His letters reveal a man searching for meaning, wrestling with faith and fate, but refusing resignation. He found solace in nature, returning often to Sagamore Hill, his family estate on Long Island, where the woods and fields provided respite and inspiration. Roosevelt's resilience did not manifest as denial. He acknowledged pain and vulnerability, drawing strength from the belief that adversity could refine character rather than diminish it. He invoked the concept of the strenuous life, the idea that challenge and suffering were essential to growth and to greatness. Even in defeat, Roosevelt regarded every trial as an opportunity for self-discovery and renewal. His reflections extended to the meaning of public life. The political failures, his loss in the 1912 election, the decline of the Progressive Party, prompted Roosevelt to consider the nature of leadership and the limitations of power. He remained engaged in civic discourse, supporting causes that reflected the enduring values of justice, conservation, and reform. Physical decline was perhaps Roosevelt's greatest adversary. Years of relentless activity, exploration, and pressure exacted a toll. Illness weakened his body, but not his spirit. He continued to write prolifically, offer support to family and friends, and even plan new adventures. His resilience was visible not just in grand gestures, but in the quiet dignity with which he faced mortality. Roosevelt's trials of age illuminate the universality of loss, how even the greatest among us are tested by sorrow and uncertainty. His capacity for reflection, humility, and continued action provides a model of resilience that transcends time and circumstance. Through suffering, Roosevelt reshaped his understanding of life, leadership, and legacy. He discovered new sources of meaning and connection, finding strength in family, nature, and service. In so doing, he demonstrated that resilience is not immunity from pain, but the courage to transform adversity into purpose. His later years, marked by loss yet infused with reflection, bear witness to a leader whose spirit could not be diminished. Roosevelt's journey through adversity endures as an inspiration, a reminder that the architecture of America's spirit is built not only by success, but by the redemptive power of resilience. Chapter 18, The Final Expedition, Adventure Until the End. At the heart of Theodore Roosevelt's story is an unrelenting pursuit of adventure, a drive so powerful that even after presiding over the United States, he could not rest on laurels or succumb to the inertia of retirement. Instead, Roosevelt sought out new frontiers, none more harrowing or emblematic than his fateful journey down the uncharted River of Doubt in the heart of the Amazon jungle. The expedition, undertaken in 1913-1914, stands as a crowning testament to his indomitable spirit, both a literal and figurative voyage into the unknown. Roosevelt's decision to embark on this Brazilian endeavor was not taken lightly. Following his unsuccessful bid for a third presidential term in 1912 as the Progressive Party candidate, many expected him to retreat quietly into the annals of history. Yet to observers of Roosevelt's nature, such a withdrawal was unthinkable. He himself proclaimed, "Old age is like everything else. To make a success of it, you've got to start young." He refused to become a relic, instead seeking challenge as a means to reaffirm life. The River of Doubt expedition was conceived in collaboration with the Brazilian government, a venture intended both for scientific exploration and to reinforce diplomatic ties between the Americas. Roosevelt co-led the party with the famed Brazilian explorer Colonel Cândido Rondon, whose tenacity and navigational skills would prove indispensable. The river, so named for its treacherous currents and uncharted status, cut through one of the most forbidding corners of the Amazon, fraught with rapids, piranhas, malarial insects, and the ever-present threat of indigenous hostility, what drew Roosevelt to this perilous quest. At root, it was the same philosophy that had guided his life, a belief that strenuous effort, endurance, and the willingness to test oneself against adversity cultivated the highest virtues. Every sinew of Roosevelt's being was animated by what he called the strenuous life, an ethic that underpinned not only his politics but also his personal endeavors. He sought to prove once more, and perhaps finally, that resolve and courage could overcome any fate. As the expedition began, the dangers quickly proved real. The party included Roosevelt's son, Kermit, whose energy and technical skill became vital, and an eclectic array of naturalists, physicians, and workers. They were underprepared for the true scale of difficulty. Months of grueling labor hacking through the jungle, meager rations, sweltering humidity, and torrential rain that turned the ground to soup and rivers into torrents. Illness struck early. Roosevelt himself fell victim to tropical fever and a subsequent infection stemming from a leg wound, a turn of events that nearly cost him his life. Frail and feverish, Roosevelt faced relentless pain. Diaries from the journey reveal moments when, out of concern for his companions, he considered ending his own life to spare them the burden of carrying him. Yet in these darkest hours, the full measure of his resolve became evident. He pressed on, willing himself forward with the same intensity that had characterized his campaigns for justice and reform at home. Thematically, the expedition was both a physical and moral crucible. For Roosevelt, there was no separation between the two. Enduring pain and adversity became proof of a life well lived, of authenticity in the face of mortality. The river, untamed, unpredictable, and unforgiving, mirrored the challenges of leadership, the uncertainties of life, and the promise of discovery that defined the American spirit itself. Ultimately, the expedition succeeded at great cost. The party emerged battered and diminished, but victorious. The River of Doubt was mapped for the first time, its existence confirmed, and its course traced on the world's maps. For Roosevelt, the personal cost was immense. He was never fully restored in health, and his body carried the scars and exhaustion of the ordeal until his death. But in spirit, he was unbroken. This final adventure was Roosevelt's ultimate affirmation that life is meant to be lived boldly, that the pursuit of endeavor for its own sake is among the highest callings. The River of Doubt expedition distilled the essence of Roosevelt, undaunted by adversity, noble in striving, and forever restless in quest. In so doing, this last great journey serves as both an epitaph and an exhortation, that we too might confront our rivers of doubt with valor, and by doing so, renew the spirit that built a nation. Chapter 19, The Legacy of Leadership, Courage, Honor, and Duty. Theodore Roosevelt's legacy as a leader extends far beyond his years in office. His enduring influence stems not only from his political achievements, but more profoundly from the moral framework by which he lived, an unwavering commitment to courage, honor, and duty. These tenets, cultivated from his earliest years and refined through adversity, became the bedrock upon which both his private and public life were constructed. Roosevelt's conception of leadership was neither transactional nor circumstantial. It was transformational, rooted in character and conviction. From his boyhood struggle with ill health, he learned courage not primarily as physical bravery, but as the resolve to persevere despite fear and doubt. This internal fortitude manifested itself throughout his life, in the boxing rings of Harvard, on the battlefield with the Rough Riders in Cuba, and in the political crucible of the White House. Central to his legacy was the idea that leadership demanded not only personal bravery, but also ethical responsibility. Roosevelt famously argued that to educate a person in the mind but not in morals is to educate a menace to society. Thus, he saw the exercise of power as a sacred trust, demanding from leaders the highest standards of honor. This view was exemplified during his presidency, particularly in his crusade against corruption within government and industry. With relentless vigor, he challenged the excesses of the Gilded Age, breaking up monopolies and championing fair treatment for the average citizen, acts that, while controversial, were animated by a sense of duty that transcended political expediency. Notably, Roosevelt's honor was not a static quality, but an active discipline, a daily commitment to doing what was right, irrespective of personal or political cost. He endured criticism from the party, the press, and even friends. Yet he believed that a leader's duty was to serve the country, not merely the comfortable opinion of the moment. His handling of the 1902 coal strike, in which he intervened to safeguard the interests of both workers and the nation, exemplified his belief that justice could not be left to the powerful alone. Courage, honor, and duty also informed Roosevelt's approach to foreign policy. While committed to peace, he recognized that the nation's place on the world stage required readiness to act decisively. His philosophy, summed up in the adage, "Speak softly and carry a big stick," was not a call to belligerence, but to preparedness and moral resolve. The negotiation of the Portsmouth Treaty, ending the Russo-Japanese War, earned Roosevelt the Nobel Peace Prize, a testament to the forceful, principled diplomacy that characterized his leadership. At their core, Roosevelt's leadership ideals were not reserved for presidents or generals. They were intended as guidance for all citizens. He preached the gospel of the strenuous life, not merely as a path to personal fulfillment, but as a duty owing to the Republic. "It is not the critic who counts," he reminded Americans, "not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena." Leadership, for Roosevelt, meant engagement, effort, and above all, integrity. The legacy bequeathed by Roosevelt is thus not solely institutional, but spiritual. He challenges every generation to pursue courage in action, honor in intent, and duty as citizenship. As we examine his life, we are invited to ask, what does it mean to lead, and how might we embody these enduring virtues in service to nation and self? Roosevelt's life offers no easy answers, but in the effort to meet his example, we come closer to fulfilling the promise at the heart of the American spirit. Chapter 20. The Spirit of Roosevelt. Lessons for Modern America. More than a century after Theodore Roosevelt's presidency, the spirit he embodied remains essential to the dilemmas and opportunities of contemporary America. This chapter seeks to distill the lessons Roosevelt's life imparts to modern society. A society beset by challenges of unity, environmental stewardship, economic inequality, and questions of national purpose. Roosevelt's values, though forged in his own era's fires, retain a striking resonance in ours. First, Roosevelt's doctrine of the strenuous life urges individuals to embrace struggle as the crucible of character. In a modern world obsessed with comfort and convenience, this ethos can appear antiquated, yet it contains profound relevance. Roosevelt rejected complacency, encouraged strenuous citizenship, and advocated for personal and communal responsibility. He believed that democracies thrive when citizens engage energetically in public life, confront difficulty with resolve, and grow stronger through adversity. In an age of division and apathy, this message is a clarion call for renewed participation and civic virtue. Second, Roosevelt's championship of ethical leadership stands in stark contrast to the cynicism that so often marks contemporary discourse. His insistence that leaders must exemplify courage and honor, and his willingness to act according to conscience, serve as a corrective to political expedience and moral ambiguity. Modern America, facing crises in trust and institutional integrity, is well served by Roosevelt's insistence that service is both a privilege and an obligation. Leaders must be both competent and good. Third, Roosevelt's vision for environmental stewardship is arguably more urgent now than in his own time. As the architect of the national park system and a fierce protector of wilderness, he foresaw the necessity of balancing progress with preservation. Today's environmental challenges, from climate change to biodiversity loss, require the same blend of scientific curiosity, bold policy, and reverence for nature that Roosevelt embodied. His example teaches that stewardship of the land is not just a technical task, it is a moral imperative rooted in respect for future generations. Fourth, Roosevelt's commitment to fairness in economic life has enduring implications for modern debates about inequality. He was unafraid to confront corporate power, to defend the rights of workers, and to advocate for a square deal for all Americans. These principles, articulated in an era of rapid industrialization, retain their relevance in a world of globalized economies and technological disruption. Roosevelt's belief in justice, opportunity, and the dignity of all citizens challenges us still to design systems that foster both freedom and equity. Finally, the spirit of Roosevelt invites us to confront change not with fear, but with hope and determination. He lived in a time of transformation, industrial booms, social upheavals, shifting international power, and met those currents with optimism, adaptability, and a faith in human capacity. Modern America, likewise buffeted by rapid change, can draw comfort and inspiration from Roosevelt's belief that the nation's best days are always ahead, provided its people remain faithful to their highest ideals. To study Roosevelt is not to yearn for a bygone age, but to recognize the enduring power of character, conviction, and service. His example asks us to nurture resilience, lead with integrity, cherish the natural world, pursue justice, and move forward, undaunted, toward the promises and perils of the future. In this, the spirit of Roosevelt remains not a memory, but a living guide for America's ongoing journey. If you found this video helpful, inspiring, or entertaining, don't forget to hit that like button. And if you're new here, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on future content. Your support means the world. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.